Poštovani gledaoci, u povodu izricanja drugostepene presude Radovanu Karadžiću pred Mehanizmom za krivične sudove UN razgovaramo sa prvim tužiocem Haškog tribunala i bivšim sudijom Ustavnog suda Južnoafričke republike Richardom Goldstonom. Goldstone će u historiji svjetske pravosudne prakse biti upamćen kao osoba koja je podigla prve optužnice protiv Radovana Karadžića i Ratka Mladića, ali i protiv Duška Tadića. Iz Cape Towna s nama je sudija Richard Goldstone. Mr. Goldstone, welcome to N1 program. You're basically father of the ICTY as you started it and established most of its procedures. Now we are at the end of informal road through MICT and important verdicts to Radovan Karadžić and Ratko Mladić in appeals. What is your opinion on its work, results and legacy 25 years on from Bosnian war?
Well, you know, it's a complicated question. Let me say that from the legal point of view, from the prosecution point of view, the tribunal has been substantially successful. All of the people who were indicted were arrested, other than those, obviously, who had not survived to see the day. So, and the number of convictions and the number of acquittals, I think, indicate that the ICTY was doing its job efficiently and correctly over many years. On the more philosophical side, on the social side, I don't believe that the tribunal really lived up to expectations. The expectations were really too high. I think it was hoped in the beginning, and I certainly shared that hope. It was hoped that the work of the tribunal would bring more peace and reconciliation between the parties to the former Yugoslavia nations. That really hasn't succeeded to the extent that it was hoped. It has had some good effects. Obviously, exposing the truth is helpful to peace. But ultimately, I would suggest it takes good leaders to bring about peace, as we were very fortunate to see in South Africa 25 years ago.
As a prosecutor, you brought in first evidences of crimes committed in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the war, especially in the area of Srebrenica, but also in the other areas. How difficult was to obtain evidences in time when crimes and wars were ongoing?
Well, during the war, it was obviously difficult. When the tribunal began, when I arrived in The Hague as the first chief prosecutor, the war was raging in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's where the war crimes were being committed, that we were particularly interested in investigating. And it was obviously dangerous and difficult to send our investigators into war zones. It became easier after the Dayton Accords when the war effectively came to an end. But we were obviously helped a great deal by the cooperation that the prosecutor's office received from the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina throughout the life of the ICTY.
Many of your team members have worked in Bosnia and Herzegovina at that time, not only sifting through evidences, but also searching for those on your list of suspects or accused. How hard was for them to get all the necessary evidences?
Well, that obviously was difficult for the same reason. What was difficult about getting suspects and people who were indicted arrested was the refusal by the Western forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina to get involved in making arrests. The argument I was given was that the military were not police, and it wasn't their job to arrest people. Well, obviously, I didn't accept that. At the time, there were United Nations forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I assumed, I think reasonably, that United Nations forces would assist the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal set up by the Security Council to arrest people. But that didn't happen, and it took some years before sufficient pressure was put on governments to assist the tribunal in making arrests. So that was very difficult. With regard to witnesses, it was easier because the witnesses that we were looking for were almost entirely in exile. There were over 300,000 Bosnian refugees in Germany alone, and that was a huge witness pool. which made life easier. So it was a complex political and legal situation on both sides.
How you came to indict Karadžić and Mladić? Can you remind us of your first indictment and whole procedure related to that?
Right. Well, you know, during the period, during the 2.25 years that I was the chief prosecutor, we had really no smoking guns. To put it that way, we had to build up the evidence from the bottom up. We had no direct evidence implicating either Karadžić or Mladić, but we relied on circumstantial evidence. The war crime is being committed, the ethnic cleansing being committed in villages and towns in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which had a large number of Serb residents, was obviously planned. It didn't just happen. The attacks were similar. The attacks were at more or less the same time. They were contemporaneous. So it was obvious that they were being directed from above. And we really put together a circumstantial case. We added to it one of the boasts that Radovanu Karadžiću made at the time on television was that nothing happened in his army without him knowing about it. Well, that was a useful element in building up the case. So when I issued the first indictments against Karadžić and Mladić, they were based on circumstantial evidence. Of course, by the time they came to trial, there was a great deal new evidence, direct evidence of intercepted telephone calls, for example, between Karadžić and Milosevic, and there was other evidence. So the case became much stronger as more evidence came in.
These cases were related to so many other cases in front of the ICTY. What kind of impact they had on each other? I mean, on cases of Karadžić and Mladić.
Well, of course, we had cooperation, as I said, from the Bosnian government, and it was really as a result mainly of pressure from the United States that led to both Karadžić and Mladić many years later, after 13, 14 years, that they were transferred for trial to The Hague. It's a great pity for the people, for the victims, that it took so long.
We know that Radovanu Karadžić is convicted of crimes of genocide in Srebrenica, but not for crimes in other 6 municipalities. How important this indictment for other municipalities, such as Prijedor, was in this case?
Well, you know, obviously it's important. I think too much emphasis, however, is placed on genocide. They were found guilty in the trial courts, both Karadžić and Mladić, of serious crimes against humanity and war crimes. And I think that should satisfy most victims. I don't believe there's any magic in the name genocide. I wouldn't feel relieved if I was charged with war crimes. It would be no relief to me that I wasn't charged with genocide. So it's really a technical question, and it's a question of weighing up the evidence, and for genocide proving the sufficient intent that is required by the definition of genocide.
When we are speaking about Radovanu Karadžić, do you expect that he could be sentenced for genocide 1, Prijedor, along with Srebrenica genocide on appeal judgment?
Yes, well, you know, I didn't study the arguments that were put up, but all I know is that the case against both Karadžić and Mladić was an extremely strong case, and I would be very surprised if the appeal succeeds to any substantial degree.
In case of Radovanu Karadžić, we are at the end of the road. In the first step, he was convicted to 40 years sentence. But some troubling signs are coming through words of the former ICTY judge, German judge Christopher Fluge, who has resigned from ICTY and later said in the Zeit interview that he is very worried that Karadžić and Mladić could end up freed by the court due to political pressures and other issues. What is your opinion on his comment, and what are your expectations or your opinions on this situation at the ICTY or MICT today?
Well, you know, I don't accept at all the statement that was made by the German judge. I don't know what it was based on. I've always found that the judges of the ICTY and now of the mixed MICT have been honest, have done their work well. Obviously, any human being is capable of mistakes, but I don't believe that they have been influenced in any way by the politics, and I believe that will be demonstrated in the judgments that are still to come out.
Could we move to case of Ratko Mladić for a while? You indicted him on similar charges to one of Radovanu Karadžiću. He's in the first line sentenced to life in prison. Now he's in appeal phase. What are your expectations or your opinion on his case when it comes to final decision? Could we expect similar decision, or could we expect something different when it comes to Radovanu Karadžiću? Or could Karadžić's sentence have any impact on his appeal judgment?
Well, you know, the crimes that Karadžić was found guilty of, I believe the only appropriate sentence is life in prison. A sentence of 40 years, of course, amounts to the same thing. But I think from the victim's point of view, there is a psychological difference between 40 years and between life. And I think the judges should have indicated the horror of humanity and of decent people in the commission of these crimes by imposing the most severe sentence possible. And I hope that will be the result in the appeal, but we'll have to wait and see.
We are at this moment in time almost 7.5 decades since world have seen a first tribunal for the war crimes, one in Nuremberg. Chief Hitler lieutenants have been sentenced just a year after the end of the war. And in ex-Yugoslavia case, we are still searching for some of the accused war criminals here in Balkans, but also we are struggling to find reconciliation. Are these kinds of tribunal future of the world justice?
Yes, I think so. You know, as I said at the beginning, I think the work substantially of the tribunal has been successful, and certainly I was in the region. I was in Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina about 7 or 8 years ago, and I certainly found that many of the people I met had good feelings for the work of the tribunal.
Before I move to one other question, let me ask you this. You also worked on a case of Kosovo, and you have a substantial role over there. Can you tell us a bit more of that? And we know that there is still some cases of war crimes which were not tried when it comes to Kosovo. How do you feel about that?
Well, I chaired, as you know, a commission of inquiry, an independent commission of inquiry into the Kosovo, into the bombing of Kosovo at the end in 2000, and we came to the conclusion unanimously on our commission that was set up by the Swedish Prime Minister. We came to the conclusion that the NATO bombing, to stop the further ethnic cleansing and atrocities being committed by the army of Milosevic, was unlawful, and we came to the conclusion that even though the Security Council hadn't authorized the use of military force to protect the Albanian population, we held it was legitimate because of the humanitarian aims that it had. And certainly it succeeded in after 78 days of bombing, which was unexpected. It certainly succeeded in protecting all of the people in Kosovo, and obviously resulted ultimately in the still contested independence that was declared unilaterally by the government of Kosovo.
Would you do something different from what you have done in 1990s when you started ICTY if you were given that same role today?
You know, the only thing I would have done differently, and it's a matter of experience, I would have hoped that the tribunal, and it was really a matter for the whole tribunal, not just for the prosecutor's office, but mainly for the registrar's office, there should have been more active outreach efforts. There should have been more satellite officers explaining to the people in the area what the ICTY was doing, what the philosophy was of the tribunal. Of course, it was difficult to do that during a war, but it was only later, in fact, virtually after I left, that mainly it was the work of the American judge Gabriel Kirk MacDonald that made outreach efforts more active and more successful. But apart from that, I'm not sure that there was anything that we should have done differently from the way it was done.
How you judge your successors at the position of the chief prosecutor, especially Ms. Carla Del Ponte and Mr. Bramertz, who led up MICT and ICTY in these last phases of their work? Would you judge them as a successful chief prosecutors when you look at the sentences and everything what was done based on the work which has started with you and Canadian chief prosecutor Louis Arbour?
Yes, certainly. I'm very proud of the work that was done by my successors. Obviously, as I said, human beings make mistakes, but they were very few, and the proof is in the positive outcome of the trials. The prosecutions, for the most part, were successful. The court indicated, the tribunal indicated its independence, and people were acquitted. And certainly, as a former chief prosecutor, I was proud when there were acquittals. I've always said that you prove the independence of any court system, of any tribunal system, you prove it by the acquittals, not by the convictions.
And at the end, let me ask you this. You have lived and worked in also divided country, South Africa, and you have worked with Nelson Mandela, who put you on a constitutional court of South Africa. Can we here in Balkans use some of your experiences to move forward in decades since?
Well, you know, I would say there are two lessons from South Africa's experience. The first is that no matter how difficult a problem might seem, no matter how intractable, in South Africa until 1990, any peaceful negotiations appeared to be absolutely impossible. It seemed impossible to believe that a minority white, which was in government, had military support, that it would give up power to a black majority. It seemed impossible, and yet it happened. So the first lesson is that no matter how difficult a problem is, there's always a possible solution on the horizon. But the second lesson, and that's the more difficult one, is it won't happen without good leaders. Without Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, without their leadership, and without their ability to get their people to agree with what they wanted, which was a peaceful resolution of the problems, it wouldn't have happened. So you need good leadership on all sides of the problem. Without that good leadership, it's not going to work out.
Mr. Goldstone, thank you so much for your time and for speaking for N1 from Cape Town in South Africa.
But that's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Poštovani gledaoci, bio je to ekskluzivni intervju s prvim tužiocem Haškog suda Richardom Goldstonom uoči drugostepene presude Radovanu Karadžiću. Hvala na pažnji i doviđenja.